Welcome back to Humankind. In this video, I'm going to cover off several mistakes that I see lots of players make, and also answer some frequently asked questions. There'll be time cards below if you're hearing a tip or a piece of advice that you don't want to hear, but I would recommend that you listen through them all. Not only will you likely hear new things, particularly if you're a beginning, intermediate, or advancing Humankind player, but also sometimes it can be useful to have some reminders. As a quick look forward at what we'll be covering, and no, it won't be the strategic genius that is me fighting this fight, although do take note. No, more importantly, we'll be talking about some quick tips on the Neolithic era and settling. Unit specialization will also be a focus, particularly at those nomadic units. I'll then move through to the meaty part of the video, talking you through both faith and stability and influence generation, as well as how to handle some aggressive AI and better manage your diplomacy. There's a lot to cover, as well as some bonus tips throughout. First and foremost though, let's talk unit specialization. An obvious example is right here with the hunting tribe. It's a nomadic unit, a special unit that gathers food throughout fighting and ransacking in order to multiply, right? The most obvious, of course, action here is to move on to the freshwater, get your food required to multiply the unit. Now, it's important to also note though that there are other units available in the game that have the same nomadic promotion. Regular Humankind players will know, of course, the Huns or the Mongols. Their unit is nomadic as well. You should always try and keep slots empty with your nomadic units so that they can then fill them up with more food, therefore creating more units for you. Likewise here with the ransack, of course, the same thing is playing out. And of course, it's not just those traditional Humankind game cultures that have that ability. The Bantu as well, another example. Here they have the Nomad and the Pioneer promotion. Not only do they gather more food from ransacking to multiply, but they can also get special curiosities that allow them to create new units. Really watching the nomadic ability here at play with the Bantu is particularly noticeable versus something like a mammoth. Their yields are always incredible. Here, the extra food, of course, is put to good use to provide some extra units. Hey, and a couple of quick small bonus tips here before I move on to the next substantial one, because it is so important that you remember this and that you play by this in every game. As you're gathering these curiosities, the ones that provide you with science and influence, you should ideally try and establish 2 outposts before you move through to the next era, before you leave the nomadic era. Now, I know that can be a challenge. You might have to hang around for a bit longer. Depending on your game speed, of course, the costs will vary. But even if you have to do a move kind of like this one, where I'm just sort of placing down an outpost, it doesn't have to be the best spot for a city in future, because it could always be attached up to another one that is already ideal for a city location. Just make sure that you get your 2 outposts down. Because of the way that the game calculates the costs, it really makes sense to establish these before you move through to the ancient era where costs are ramped up. And secondly here, of course, as you complete the knowledge star, the 1 star that I really would recommend you complete above all else, although grabbing as many populations as you can is also a good idea, you should pick the storytellers. This adds +1 science per population on city or outpost, and this tends to be more useful, particularly compared to food, but also industry because of the way that they're calculated. Food is a great example. Excess food doesn't do a lot because your cities can only grow at +1 population per turn, regardless of how much excess food they have. And while there are a few niche cases where it can be more important, generally speaking, storytellers is absolutely the way to go. Religion in Humankind can be a very powerful tool, and because of the intricacies around it, it can also be one that's less understood. For starters, in general, I think it's a good idea to go for polytheism over shamanism still, but that's a conversation for another day. More importantly, I want to tell you about actually how religion works in Humankind and how you can use it to your advantage, okay? We're not going to go completely into all of the ins and outs of it, but it's important to know a few things. Firstly, do not forget to open up the religious screen down the bottom left here and check the follower count. This is how many populations within the empire, within the map indeed, that are following your religion. You need to reach these key milestones, the first one is 25, in order to start unlocking religious tenets and starting to get benefits out of your religion, out of the faith that you're generating. It is key, therefore, that you focus on 2 yields to grow your religion. Firstly, food. You want to make sure you are growing your populations, keeping populations in your city, not expelling them to build districts, for example. And then secondly, of course, your faith generation. By building things like Obelisk of the Gods, or choosing cultures that provide you with faith, you can insert your dominance in faith generation over your neighbors. Those are the 2 factors that you need to focus on fundamentally. You need to have greater faith output than your neighbors, so your religion becomes dominant around the world, and you'll see that with the magic of time in a minute. And then secondly, you need to have populations, because without them, you don't reach the follower counts required to benefit truly from a religion. A culture like the Celts is therefore a pretty solid early pick because it tackles the 2 things that you need, +3 food on territories and food on your farmers, and an additional 3 faith, which is absolutely likely all that you'll need to tip the balance into your favor in the early game, provided that you've kept up with your holy site. And as you can see, the religious pressure, my faith output, is causing my religion to take over territories that have lower faith output than mine. You can hover over it, of course, to get a feel for just how well your faith has penetrated into the territory. Now, I've also reached and well exceeded my limit, thanks to, again, those 2 factors. Me having high population in my territories, and my faith output being high enough to overwhelm my opponents, or at least hold my religion in my own. As I go into the tenant screen, of course, I can choose to upgrade. There are, of course, 4 tiers. As a very quick recommendation, if you haven't watched me play the game live, respect the Seas bounties, and the next upgrade that follows, Observe Fasts afterwards, are a fantastic combo to get a huge amount of food out of the sea and surge your faith even higher, because your population will be even higher. Other good grabs include Seek Wisdom for the really powerful scientific strategic resource gain that carries on through, as well as, of course, the industrial boost. +2 industry on forest and woodland can be insanely powerful. There are some incredible benefits hidden in here. Some incredible benefits hidden inside of the religious system in Humankind, particularly, of course, at the top end with a whole load of extra faith. Money in particular is my favorite. I won't dwell too much longer on giving you tenet recommendations here, because that's not really within the wheelhouse of this video, but I think it's important that advancing players understand those 2 key yields and how they can maximize their faith to maximize future yields. It is really powerful and worthwhile doing. And while you don't have to necessarily be the religious leader, it is nice to have that early customization, that ability to build your faith early on and build it around the environment that you're in particular. If you have lots of forests, go with that one. If you've got access to the coastline, you may want to improve your harbors. That playthrough is particularly strong. Either way, I'll leave it up to you, but important to note that faith and food, because population is your friend when it comes to building a religion around you. Next, I want to talk diplomacy, and in particular the importance of having a small standing army. Before you roll your eyes and click away and go, oh yeah, whatever, I know. Or, the other end of the spectrum, I always have an army. Let me tell you why, and some little tips around it as well. When you're in the diplomacy screen like this, and you're having a look at the custom Humankind personas that you're versing, here I'm versing Lewis Brindley of the Yogscast. If you hover over them, you'll see your strength relationship alongside trust and current attitude, and here you can see we are much more powerful than them. The AI is calculating how strong you are relative to it when it's making its decisions. Or at the very least, it is conscious of it, and it's telling you about it as well. Now, this is particularly useful if you're looking at an opponent trying to figure out whether you're going to be attacked or not. We are much more powerful than them. Brilliant. And here we are comparable in strength. Suggests to me that the strength of our empires as a whole are relatively the same. I might need to then improve my standing army. Whether you're going on the aggressive or literally just looking to stop the opportunistic AI from declaring war on you all the time, I hear people talk about this from time to time in the comments below, so let me help you out with that as well. It's fairly straightforward. Firstly, make sure you're up to date on your walls. This will provide extra fortification to the districts of your city. You'll want to make sure that your city does, at the very least, then have a few tiles that are districts. This will give your peasants a place to stand when they defend it. Next up, the other important thing to bear in mind is that you'll need some defensive forces. You actually need a standing army to stand and defend or deter. I'd recommend generally a couple of ranged units once you've got your rules online. 2 per city at the very least if you've got some extra peasants. Ideally it would be 4 in every city, but sometimes that might be difficult to muster. So at the very least, go through, make sure you've got your walls, and then make sure that you've trained at least 2 ranged units as well. As I go through and meet new players, I can always hover over this, check on their relative strength, make sure that I'm stronger than everyone else. So long as I'm stronger, they should fear me. Of course, you can always look to ensure peace is secured by taking the diplomatic route as well, ensuring that your defensive forces are backed up by things like non-aggression pacts and opening up trade as well. Trade is, of course, so vitally important, and as a bonus tip here, let me just reiterate the importance of trade, because I know that sometimes the message hasn't gotten through. Maybe you haven't seen my older tips and tricks videos, many of you, if you're new to the channel or new to me. So let me just reiterate the power of trade. It is a one-time purchase. 54 bucks goes to the seller. You pay it as the buyer, and then you gain complete and full access to this resource. In this case, it's saffron, which will give me an extra 2 food on all of my farmers' quarters. And that's just for having 1 saffron attached. Plus 5 science on cities from attaching this whale poop, actually whale tail, I should say. And of course, the strategic benefits from trading these strategic resources as well cannot be understated. Make sure you keep trading and building up those diplomatic ties. It'll also help reduce instances of war if people are dependent on you for access to resources to keep their empire stable, fed, productive, whatever it may be. The second mechanic that I think sort of goes alongside religion that advancing players really need to be aware of is stability and influence. And here I'm going to focus specifically within cities. I have 2 examples prepared. Firstly, in this city here, you can see it's at 27% stability, and you can see that on the stability band there are 3 categories: 30% and below, then a central category from 30 to 90%, and then right up the top, that 90% plus. At the moment, the city is below 30%. This is a bad place for it to be. You can't build a lot of things. You're restricted. You are indeed mutinous. Not great for your population. It's also bad for your influence generation. The relationship here, by the way, if you are mutinous like I am here, you'll be receiving no influence per population. In a city where you're in this middle band between 30 and 90%, it's called strained, you'll receive 1 influence per population. And then if you can manage to find yourself a city where you're in the top band, which I will be as I move through turns here, largely thanks to things like this: trading with people. Not like you, because you've refused it. But from other trade partners, of course, I can continue to pick up luxury resources that will provide me with more stability on my cities, as well as the stability upgrades themselves within cities. I've covered them a little bit here on the channel, so I won't dwell on them too much, but in a nutshell, you're looking at those infrastructure upgrades, and of course districts like garrisons and commons quarters. Once you bring yourself back up to the 100%, or indeed above 90, you'll notice that the city turns to settled. In the settled state, you'll receive 2 influence per population. Again, there is a reliance on population here to scale, but this time we're not building our faith, but instead building our influence generation. This will of course help you expand and adopt more civics. It snowballs from here. Maybe you want to use your ability. I could use greener pastures to pump a whole load of population into my city. Not a bad move, considering I'm focusing on food to build my faith and here to build my influence. I hope that you can see the added benefits to population that aren't necessarily immediately obvious to early Humankind players, to, say, beginning, even some advancing players don't necessarily have a great grasp on these features. Hopefully, I've highlighted them both here to you and more so that you can continue to advance your own Humankind game. And finally, a small bonus tip at the end here. It's really important that you are at least at the top of your city cap, ideally 1 over. The penalty for being 1 over is only minus 10 or 11 on your influence per turn, so it's really not a big deal. Start upgrading or taking territories. Whatever way is your preferred approach, make sure that you keep on top of this. It's really important that you're at least at that 4 out of 4, because city yields, even relatively early in the game, vastly outweigh any negative benefits, even from being +1 over your city cap. Here you can see this brand new city, without even having the influence generating upgrade of the pottery workshop, is producing enough influence to counterbalance any negative penalties from even being 1 over the top, as well as of course generating me faith and loads of other things that it may not have been able to do by itself. Always important that you ride that city cap high, and with that, I'm going to leave you now to go and play Humankind. And I'm going to finish off this game. Thank you very much for watching my sort of advancing tips and tricks video. I hope that you enjoyed this. I do hope that you've learned something new. There will be a portion of you watching this who have learned nothing, and there'll be a portion of you watching this who have learned everything. Maybe all of this was new information. Hopefully you've found a middle ground. I'm going to observe feasts to get 5 extra food off my harbours here, and maybe go and enjoy the benefits of a growing, snowballing religion and cultural benefits through influence and stability as well out the side. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.